Hello. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Uh, it is an absolute honor to welcome you all to this insightful session. I'm Nisha, PhD scholar at School of Economics, and it is my privilege to introduce today's esteemed speaker, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, sir. Professor Mehrotra is a renowned economist, a leading expert in labor market, human development, and public policy, and has made significant contribution to understanding employment, economic growth in India. He is currently a visiting professor at the Center for Development Studies, University of Bath, UK, and before that he was a professor of economics, Center for Informal Sectors, Labor Studies, JNU. Professor Mehrotra has completed his PhD in economics from Cambridge University, and after that he spent 15 years with two UN agencies, UNICEF and UNDP. He was also the chief economist of the Global Human Development Report, New York. In the year 2006, he returned to India to head the Rural Development Division and Development Policy Division Planning Commission. He was the lead author of several chapters of 11th and 12th five-year plans of India. He was also the Director General of National Institute of Labor Economics Research. He has published 13 books, including 3 with Cambridge University Press and 4 with Oxford University Press. He consults regularly with ILO, Asian Development Bank, UNDP, UNESCO as labor economist and development economist. We are truly privileged to have him with us today. On behalf of School of Economics, I welcome you, sir, to this seminar. Thank you. Then I'm also honored to introduce the chair of today's seminar, Professor D. Narasimha Reddy. Professor Reddy has retired as professor in economics and Dean School of Social Science, University of Hyderabad. He has made significant contribution to the field of labor economics, agrarian studies, and political economy of development. Presently, he is visiting professor at Institute of Human Development, New Delhi. We are delighted to have him with us to lead the today's seminar. With that, I invite you, Professor, to take the chair. Thank you, sir.
Friends, it gives me a great pleasure. Personally, I am very elated to be here because, of all the things that she said about Professor Mehrotra, one of the most interesting thing as far as I am concerned is one of the leading public intellectual of the country right now. He has been writing extensively to throw light on whatever that is being said in the name of growth or development, mostly raising questions. Therefore, the very title of today's topic, it starts with questions. You can add number of questions to that. I mean, even the first part, we are going fast, how long you would go fast, and what perhaps will happen if only that line is taken without looking down at the second question. It is a great opportunity for me. I have been reading him regularly because he is writing so fast. It's also difficult to keep up with his writings. So it's a rare opportunity for me also to be personally sit here along with you to listen to him. Thank you very much for bringing me and giving a chair to sit here. I request Santosh to give a lecture.
Namaskara, good morning. Such a pleasure to see you all. It's my first time ever in the University of Hyderabad, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you very much, the university, the School of Economics, the Dean, and of course my good young friend and co-author, Professor Jajati Parida. So thank you very much indeed for having me. This campus is quite amazing, I have to tell you, because in some ways it is quite unlike any other that I've come across in India. I mean, and I tell you on the basis of considerable experience lecturing across the country, which is what I sort of pretty much do mostly now since I superannuated from JNU. Now JNU has a campus of about 1,000 acres. You guys have a campus of 2,000 acres. I mean, talk about, this may not sound very kind, wastage of urban space in a metro city like Hyderabad, or a metro city like Delhi, where the land prices are just going through the roof. In your city also land prices are going through the roof. But anyway, be that as it may, that's the way our governments, including our railways, have used land extremely wastefully, and you're having to give away land to other public institutions and even private institutions in the process. Anyway, be that as it may, I'm going to turn to something that's very close to your heart. Jobs. That's the first thing that's on your mind, I'm sure, as you begin to graduate. Because I have to tell you, even 10 years ago, the labor market was much easier. Much, much easier. You want it a little louder? Acha. I didn't realize that it had fallen down. Just put it on my Nehru jacket. Yeah, thanks very much. I think it should be. Is it tight enough? Or you put it here if you want. Put it here if you want, wherever you want. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I hadn't noticed that it had slipped off my shirt. So thank you for pointing that out. Anyway, the labor market has become much, much tighter, much more difficult for you. And it has everything to do with the fact that we are in an advanced stage of our demographic dividend. Before I start, I'm going to ask you a question. Who in this room can define for me the demographic dividend? Define it. Because I'm looking at economists, and most of you are training to be, I assume, development economists. Who will attempt to define it for me? Yeah, please.
Economic benefit that a country is going to achieve. So, the demographic transition, because of demographic transition, the age structure changes, and the economic benefit we are going to have is economic benefit.
Right. Good. There's nothing wrong in what you said. Everything right in what you said. It's still not the definition. So let me define it for you. I know that a lot of people use the term, but they don't quite fully appreciate what is happening. defined as the period in the life of a nation when the share of the working age population 15 to 59 is rising and the share of the dependent population, i.e. under 15 and over 60-year-olds, is falling. Okay? It's that period when the share of the working age population rises. What you expect happening at the same time is that workers who are predominantly at the beginning of that stage of development, at the beginning of the demographic dividend, at the beginning of the demographic transition, most of the workers are in agriculture. As development takes place, workers transition out of agriculture into industry and into services. That's the process of structural change. With the share of agriculture falling, the share of industry and services rising, because that's where productivity is higher than in agriculture. So workers move out, incomes, if they get jobs, if they get jobs in the non-farm sector, there, because productivity is higher, incomes are higher. Because incomes are higher, savings are higher. The savings to GDP ratio rises at the macro level. When the savings to GDP ratio rises at the macro level, it's highly likely that the investment to GDP ratio will rise, which is exactly what has been happening in our country. Our dividend began in the early 1980s. It is going to end in 2040. You are the demographic dividend. When you turn around and look at each other, you are the dividend. It's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. Let's start with this basic fact, and then you will begin to appreciate how what I'm going to be speaking about has very direct relevance to what you are going to be experiencing. Right. So that's the question which we are starting with. Why India is growing fast? We're constantly being told that India is the fastest growing large economy, etc., etc. I'll examine that, the facts behind that, but not creating jobs. India is growing fast, yes and no. I'll tell you why I say both yes and no. Yes, because it's growing faster than everyone else in the world, and in most other major economies of the world, it's growing faster. But that's only the case for the last 2 or 3 years. It was the second fastest growing large economy in the world for the last 20 years. Already, after China. China slowed because China slowed. We're not growing faster, as I will demonstrate. We're not growing any faster. It's just that in the last 2 or 3 years, China has slowed, and we've become the fastest growing large economy in the world. We've also rebounded from one of the worst contractions in the economy in the world in FY21 after COVID, because of a very badly managed health crisis and a very badly managed economy over the course of that crisis, which is the reason why the contraction of our economy in FY21 was twice as large as the contraction in the global economy on account of COVID. So don't believe it when someone turns around and says, oh, we did badly because of COVID. Well, why did you contract twice as much as the global economy? You have to ask that question, and the answer lies in the way we managed it, a subject that I could come back to in the question and answer, but I won't have time to go into. And no, it's not growing fast enough for at least from your purposes. And for my purposes also, I would say, because we estimate that we have to grow at 8% per annum for at least 20 years if we have to create the jobs that are needed, that I began by talking about in the non-farm sector. Okay, we're just not I'll demonstrate this to you on the base that our growth of being 6.5 and the fastest growing ain't going to do it for you. Ain't going to do it for you is what I'm trying to say. Because the jobs are not going to be growing fast enough for all of you to be absorbed. So you will actually end up being in jobs of a lower order, of a lower quality, possibly, than what you aspired to or hoped for, given your outstanding training. Anyway, I won't mention the MIT, the middle income trap, just yet. It's too early to introduce the notion of the middle income trap, but if you're interested, I can sort of speak about it later. In brackets, you're seeing WDR, World Development Report 2024. You're welcome to download the World Bank's World Development Report 2024. It talks about, it does a very good analysis of the middle income trap. I think there are still problems with that analysis. If you're interested, you should download it, and you will see that India is sort of pretty much moving into a middle income trap also. I'm not going to go there just yet, but let me move on quickly. There is another sense in which India is not growing faster. You see, let me give you a snapshot or a very quick chronology of the rates of growth in the last 75 years and how they have evolved. In your classroom, you've already heard about the period 1950 to 1980, when our growth rate was 3.5% per annum, best known thanks to Professor Raj Krishna as the Hindu rate of growth. Nothing to do with Hinduism or Hindutva, do not get confused. I'm not going to give you the background of the term, of the reasons why it was called Hindu rate of growth. I can answer your question later on if you're interested. 3.5%, much faster than the first half century of the 20th century, from 1900 to 1950, of a half a percentage point per annum. So 3.5 was very good, but much slower than many of the East Asians were growing. That's why 3.5 is not regarded as particularly strong, particularly because our population was growing at 2% per annum at least. So our per capita income was only growing at just over 1% per annum. Not good enough, clearly, to bring down poverty very much. However, by the early 1980s, the demographic dividend kicks in. The growth rate begins to improve, also partly on account of economic reforms beginning in the early 1980s. And through the 1980s, a lot of economic reforms were put in place. So your growth rate goes up to about 5.4% per annum over the 1980s. And then, of course, you have the Big Bang reforms, early 1990s onwards, after which, in the 90s, the growth rate already perked up to 6.4% per annum. And then comes this century, the 21st. And by then, your savings rate, partly on account of the demographic dividend, was already standing at 23% of GDP, which had been 6% of GDP in 1950. So in 2002-03, the savings rate stands at 6% per annum. Sorry, 2-3, it stands at 23% per annum, and your investment rate is also gradually perked up to 24% per annum. So what you, by 2002-03. However, now notice what happens. And this is the period when we become the second fastest growing large economy in the world. And this is the period of what is known, very well known in the literature, as the dream run, meaning from about 2002-03 to about 7-8, when we actually grow at roughly 8.5 to 9% per annum. Our savings rate goes from 23 to 37 in a matter of 6 years, by 7-8. 2007-8, 37%. Our investment rate goes from 24 to 38% of GDP, unprecedented in our history. Almost corresponding to what China had experienced already. So China, is in a class apart. Their savings rate have been over 40-45%, investment rates over between 45 and 48%. We're not getting there no way. So anyway, point is, that's why our growth rate over that period really perked up, and then come the global economic crisis. It falls a little bit, but we still revive. The bottom line is that over the 2004 to 14 period, our growth rate averages 7.8% per annum. Compare that to the last 10 years, 14 to 24, 5.8% per annum. From 7.8, you're down by 2 percentage points to 5.8% per annum. So when I say that India is growing fast, yes, you can say India is the fastest growing large economy. The point is it's still growing at 2 percentage points lower than what it was doing then. Why is that important? We shouldn't be overly obsessed with growth rates. As economists, you must never be overly obsessed with growth rates. If you read some of the conceptual work or theoretical work I've done, you will find evidence for that. I don't have the time to go there yet. If you're interested, I can give you some references towards the end. The bottom line here is that the growth rate drops. And why is that? You see, why was employment not such a big issue till 10 years ago? Because we were generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs each year over that period from 2004 to 14. When the number of entrants into the labor force was relatively small, because there had been a massification of higher education, a massification of school education prior to that. So the number of entrants into the labor force was relatively limited, yet the jobs you were creating was 7.5 million new non-farm jobs per annum. In fact, those non-farm, please remember non-farm, because no one, after getting educated, not one of you will want to be back in agriculture, right or wrong? Absolutely. Not even the rural route. They have no intention or a desire to be in. So that's the important point. Why do I say this? It's very important for you to understand, because a lot of talk that you will hear in the national media, and I say this advisedly, use the term advisedly, the Darbari media, okay? Because some of you may still be watching it. Many of us don't watch it. Most of us don't watch it actually. The more literate you are, the more educated you are, the less likely that you are watching the national media. Because you are only reading or watching disinformation and misinformation. Our government is telling us that in the last 4 years, we've created 80 million new jobs, 8 crore new jobs. When our Prime Minister said this publicly, I almost fell out of my chair laughing. I genuinely did. Because ILO's work has told us that during COVID, jobs across the economies across the world were lost. How did we do so miraculously that we created 8 crore new jobs in the very years that the rest of the world was doing the exact opposite? Well, in the eyes of the government and a series of government economists, and I will not hesitate to name them because I have to take them on almost on a monthly basis. That is the writings that Professor D.N. Reddy was talking about, that yes, 8 crore jobs were added. Guess where? Guess where? I want you to guess where. Huh? Agriculture. They were added in agriculture. Are you serious? I mean, does anyone want to be in agriculture? I am saying what happened as a result of the bad management of COVID, of the health crisis on the one hand, and the poor economic policy decisions and the nature of the fiscal and monetary policy stimulus in 2020 and 21 was that there was a massive reverse migration. You know that. You saw it on television, right? Many of you might have been there out on the roads actually providing these poor people who were trying to cycle back to UP or Bihar, with food and so on. 35 million went back in 2020-21, and by 2024 that number had shot up to 80 million. 8 crore, the exact number that the PM was saying. And they have the audacity to tell you And the Darbari media has no problem in repeating this ad nauseum with, Dr. Sujit Bhalla, India's executive director of the IMF, telling us the same thing. Professor Vishwanath Goldar, an ex-Institute of Economic Growth professor, a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics with me between 2020 and 21 and 22. They have the audacity to tell you this on the basis of RBI funded CLEMS data. I don't have time to go into that. I'm just wanting you to understand how much disinformation and misinformation is around to fool you. What I'm trying to tell you is be not fooled, because you are economists, you're training to be economists. If you don't stand up for the right data and don't understand that data, this is your problem and you're hurting yourself. Anyway, let me now quickly move on. We've had a fast recovery post-COVID, but that was because our base was low also. Okay? Moving on. So there was a base effect. The other thing I think you need to keep in mind as we move forward is none of the international agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, none of them are saying that we are, in this decade at least, likely to grow at more than 6.5% per annum, which has roughly been the growth, which has been just slightly over the 5.8% per annum that we've averaged between 2014 and 24. But now, I'm going to sort of walk you through what the narrative is in a minute. All this you've already seen. The bottom line is that we are the poorest country among the G20. Our per capita income rank in the world, per capita income rank, market exchange rates, is in the 120s or something. Maybe it's in the 140s. I've seen different numbers. We are still a low middle income country. We want to be a high income country in 24 years' time. Okay? You'll probably know the thresholds for the low middle income country category, which is about $1,000 to $4,400 per capita per annum. Okay? Market exchange rates. We are at $2,500. It's not $2,800 as I say there, it's actually $2,500. Okay? So we are very far from the upper middle income bottom threshold. The upper middle income starts at 4,400, goes to 14,000. So in order to get to high income level, we've got to get to 14,000, assuming that these brackets remain the same, these ranges remain the same for LIC, LMIC, UMIC, and HIC. You've understood the acronyms that I've used? Lower middle, upper middle, high income. Okay. In JNU, in the Center for Informal Sector and Labor. You see, near Niti Aayog Patel Chowk in Delhi, there is a Central Statistical Organization of India. They estimate the GVA, the GDP of the nation, right? How do you think this has been done in a highly informalized economy? Because about 85% of the enterprises, non-farm enterprises in our country, actually it would be nice if the fans are on. Yeah, please. I do want the fan to be on. 85% of our enterprises, of all non-farm enterprises, are in the unorganized sector. Not all firms are registered with the government. Forget about all, 70% of non-farm enterprises in the unorganized sector are not registered. You heard me right. Because I've done a paper in the Indian Journal of Labor Economics in September of 23. Please read that. You will find this data systematically analyzed. That धीमे थोड़ा सा धीमे कर दें बस. So if obviously if you don't know that these enterprises exist, how is the CSO estimating what is the GVA, gross value added, of these enterprises? Because if you don't estimate the GVA of these enterprises, and 85% of GDP is coming from the non-farm sector, then clearly all these enterprises are contributing and they have to be calculated. What the CSO does is the following, has historically done this, okay? Very important for you to appreciate and understand this, okay? Because we are a highly informalized economy. That the CSO uses GVAs, let's say for a sector like textiles, for the organized sector, and projects on that basis on the assumption that the unorganized textile sector has grown at the same rate, because for the vast majority unorganized sector enterprises in textiles, the CSO doesn't know. Okay? So there's bound to be error. But this is an error which we had already always known about all the way till 2008. Sorry, 2016. It's an error which we know, so it's a consistent error that would have been. So we have less reason to worry about the GDP and GVA numbers up until 2016. So what's the importance of 2016? Can someone tell me what happened on the 8th of November 2016? Everyone knows. But do you know what kind of colossal damage it did to the unorganized sector? You have zero idea of what kind of colossal damage it did to the unorganized sector, because all their transactions have always taken place in cash. You take out 86% of the currency, the bottom is knocked out of their lives. They collapsed in large numbers and never really recovered. Not very far from you in Tamil Nadu is Tirupur. They used to have 5,000 textiles, other enterprises. You know what that number fell to? 500. As though that was not bad enough. And there were political reasons and only political reasons for doing the demonetization. Those of you who don't know can educate yourself later. 6 months later, you get a poorly designed and badly implemented GST. Another exogenous shock, a policy-induced shock like the demon was on the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector, which was just beginning to sort of somewhat recover, goes into a spiral down. What's the impact? The CSO tells us that over the next 9 quarters, the GDP fell every quarter, all the way till the quarter just before when COVID begins, meaning January to March of 2020. That's when COVID begins. That's that's a natural shock, COVID. But there were policy-induced shocks thanks to policy post-COVID. That was a global health shock. But what were the policy-induced shocks? The government locks down the whole country. The whole nation is locked down. We were the only country in the world where the whole nation was locked down at 4 hours notice. A country of 1.4 billion people, you get a national lockdown at 4 hours notice where none of the state government chief ministers, chief secretaries actually know kaise handle karna hai. You get guidelines only 3 weeks later, and there is reverse migration begins because jobs are lost, because there are no planes, no trains, no cars, no roads, everything comes to a stop. China didn't do that. China only locked down Wuhan. China only locked down Hubei province. They stopped flights and trains between Hubei and Shanghai and Beijing, nothing else. The rest of the country was functioning. You get the point? Who told us to lock down the whole country? And it was the strictest lockdown according to the Blavatsky School of Government in Oxford, which is doing a metric of lockdowns of countries. Strictest possible. So national lockdown, strictest lockdown, 4 hours notice, exogenous shock, no question about it, which was policy induced. As though that was not bad enough. You get a package of fiscal and monetary policy which was weaker than the one which we put in when we were when I was in the planning commission, when the global economic crisis broke. When the global economic crisis broke, the fiscal stimulus alone was 3.5% of GDP. You know what the fiscal stimulus in FY21 was? 2% of GDP. You know what the average of the fiscal stimulus in the rich countries was? Over 6% of GDP. Okay, we can't compare ourselves to the rich countries. What about the middle income countries? 4.7% of GDP. What was ours? 2% of GDP, 2.1. This is neoliberalism gone berserk. When, you know, the rest of the world was going Keynesian, we were going in the exact opposite direction. Give you an example of what was happening with our monetary policy stimulus. Our credit stimulus and our monetary policy stimulus size was over 6% of GDP. What was the size of the monetary stimulus in the EMEs, the emerging market economies? 1.9% of GDP. What does that tell you? It tells you that you had created the basis for sustained wholesale price inflation, which is exactly what happened. Anyway, I wanted to demonstrate this, that these are policy-induced shocks for you, which is what has reduced the growth rate after that. So you may have become the fastest growing large economy. Big deal, because you actually delivered massive shocks to the economy, first place. So because the unorganized sector shrank, the point is the CSO cannot actually estimate what is the scale of the rank of the shrinkage in the unorganized sector. Therefore, the CSO's estimates of the projections based on organized sector segment of textiles, which is the example I was giving you, onto the unorganized, is gone haywire. So your 5.8%, which is what you are being told, is not believable. It is not believable because the government itself doesn't know how much was the shrinkage. We are only just beginning to get to know from the ASU's data. Anyway, we have more evidence of that this is not believable, partly because private consumption is still growing at half the rate of the GDP is. Why is private consumption growing slowly? Because jobs are not there. And you know, it's also questionable because 16-17 GDP growth was claimed at 8.3%, the very year in which there was a demonetization, when you would expect, you know, Geeta Kopinath sitting in the IMF estimated that it should have impacted the GDP by at least 1 percentage point. What is the claim? 8.3. In other words, the GDP has gone up by 2 percentage points higher than what it was. Then what was expected? Forget about what was expected. Hello proves beyond a shadow of doubt that the GDP numbers, fastest growing large economy of the world, highly questionable. Do you understand what I am saying? As it is with the highly questionable 5.8%, is lowered by 2 percentage points. Now you understand what I am trying to say and why the labor market is behaving the way it is. Okay, I am going to move on very quickly. All of this has been accompanied by something that some of you may be interested in. Most of you see evident, hard evidence, visible, tangible evidences, is the rising inequality, both wealth inequality as well as income inequality. It's not that inequalities, wealth and income have not been increasing ever since economic reforms began, but if those of you who have not read the Piketty, Chancel, Somanchi and Bharti paper by the World Inequality Lab in late 2023 on India, a very systematic analysis of what has happened to inequality of both wealth and income in our country, you know, they come to a conclusion which blew my mind, honestly blew my mind. Of course, it is being challenged by the Shamika Ravis and the Sanyals of the world, the Prime Minister's Economic Council. Never mind that. The point is that Piketty, Chancellor et al. Say that India is now more unequal in both wealth and income, is almost as unequal as 100 years ago under the British Raj. Okay. We've seen a massive increase of $100 billionaires in a matter of 4 years from 2020 to 2024. One minor statistic that should interest you in this number of dollar billionaires, because you're all middle class and all of us gloat over the phenomenon that we have the third largest dollar billionaires in the world. We have about 200 now. In the period of 4 years over COVID, it has gone from about 102 to about 200. Of that, the largest number is of health dollar billionaires. Aha, what does that tell you? COVID was a massive money-making exercise, became the basis for a massive money-making exercise, and the expansion of a highly private sector entrenched health sector, which has actually only burgeoned and burgeoned in unimaginable ways just over the 4 years. You get the point. 34 of the 100-odd dollar billionaires in 4 years. I learned this from Sainath. He really knows his stuff. He's really looked at this kind of data. It just blew my mind. Anyway, moving on. All this has implications for the argument that I'm making, because it is showing up why there is a demand constraint in the economy. That's why private consumption is only half of the GDP growth rate, supposedly, all of which has implications for the future growth rate, current and the future growth rate. So why the jobs slow down? There are obvious supply side issues, but demand is also very important. So policy-induced shocks we have already talked about, but I am saying that these are deep enough to be structural. The crisis, economic crisis is structural. Let's look at the 4 drivers of economic growth. I've already mentioned them, but just give you some numbers. Private consumption, the first driver of growth, has been maintained by cuts in household savings. Household savings is the highest component of the total savings to GDP ratio. The other savings come from corporates and from government. Household savings, which was pre-COVID about 24%, fell to 17%. It's climbed back up to about 20%, but it's still lower than the pre-COVID levels, 0.1. And it has risen, but at the cost of retail debts rising. I think all of you probably who follow the pink press will know this. Retail debts have risen. PFC, meaning private final consumption expenditure, essentially being driven by the middle and the upper middle classes, but there is a limit to how much upper, middle, and middle income people even like us can consume, and that cannot drive our growth rate. And of course, I've already walked you through what happened to the unorganized sector, and so there's been barely some recovery, as I've demonstrated more recent work by analyzing the ASUS data, the annual survey of enterprises in the unorganized sector. Data began to be released. It's been released in the last few months for 21, 22, 22, 23, and 23, 24. If you sort of Google me, you can follow my pieces, and you will see that there has been some recovery in the unorganized sector, but it's been much slower than you would have hoped and expected. And I've already spoken about the inequality. GFCF, the gross fixed capital formation, the investment rate, which is the second driver. You see, this is a foundationally important point. Why does the growth rate come down by 2 percentage points to 5.8% in the last 10 years? It's because the investment rate overall, which was in the preceding preceding 10-year period, which had been in the range of 32% to 38%, that was the range of GDP. It has been in the last 10 years in the range of 26% to 31, 32%. In FY 24-25, it is now just climbed back up to 32%. The bottom line is the range itself is way lower than in the preceding period, so the growth rate is lower. And we are in a situation where capacity utilization remains at under 75% in most sectors. MSMEs, very little new investment is being taken place. Exports, I mean, this was a big shocker when I started looking at the data, because in 2013-14 and before that, for 25 years since the economic reforms began, in merchandise goods, exports were rising at on average about 15% per annum. And that's how we went from about 10-11% of GDP in 1992 for exports to 25% of GDP for exports by 2007-8, but which is comparable to what you find in another large economy called China, 25% of GDP. But believe it or not, it was, so merchandise exports were $318 billion in 13-14. In the next 5 years, it actually falls, which had never happened in the preceding 25 years. No one tells you that. It actually falls down to something like $265 billion, and it was range bound until about 4 or 5 years ago, when it rose above the $318 billion range, point. If you're seeing exports now picking up, they are all driven by services. So services share in total exports has gone from about 30% to about 40%, because the services have been rising. Merchandise exports are not doing that well at all. Imagine the Trump threat now under the circumstances. Moving on. Fourth driver, government consumption or government investment, where given the you understand, if you're, because these are debts you will pay. Be under no illusion, these are debts you will pay. Ordinary people don't understand this, you economists should understand this. I mean, don't even get me going here. I'm going to move on in the interest of time. However, there is a narrative. Of course, we are the fastest growing large economy, but there is this narrative that you have to also appreciate, and because you may well be employed by these organizations who might be doing campus interviews with you just now. I know that some of you have not come because there are campus interviews going on. HSBC, Morgan Stanley, Standard & Poor, they've been publishing reports. What have we been telling you? Oh, there is a new economy of India. There is a new India, that's the government narrative, and there is a new economy of India. They recognize that this new economy is 15%. What is this 15% of the total economy? Let me tell you. There are essentially two high-tech sectors, some among goods and some among services. Let me just analyze which ones those are. So in the goods sector, you've heard about mobile handsets. We become an Apple producer, Apple phone producer, iPhone producer, we're exporting it, and we are an assembler. We're not a manufacturer. I hope you know that. Anyway, mobile handsets, pharma, we are big in any case. Automobile, it's true. 2, 3, 4. Not for India, a subject I will come back to. Moving on. That's one thing. The second high-tech sector, of course, consists of the startup space, which you are hearing a great deal about. In every public debate that I participate in, the government spokesperson will tell you about, oh, look at the jobs we are creating in the startups. Some of you might actually be hoping that you will get jobs in these startups. Be not so sure, because many of them keep closing down. Tuck, 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 tuck. They keep coming down. Market size is not growing. So what are these? They have certainly plugged into a digital public infrastructure called India Stack, and it's spreading fintech, e-commerce, edtech, logistics, health tech, food tech. You know it all. We all use it. Of course, these are all foreign capital promoted startups. When the money in the venture capital will dry up, we don't know. So these are the new economies, which are making the growth, something like 6.6, 6.5% per annum. And the HSBCs, the Morgan Stanleys and the S&P, Standard & Poor, all recognize this. Best case scenario, you're going to still grow at only 6.5, which is what the IMF, OECD, World Bank are also saying. Yes, it's higher than the pre-COVID 6%, certainly, but at that rate, you only double GDP in 11 years. That means from your current level of $3.8 trillion, you'll go to $7.5 trillion in 11 years. In 2036, barely 11 years short of your 2047 high income gap, okay? And surely they also recognize 6% is not good enough to generate sufficient jobs. They admit it, okay? They admit it. They say so. Because it generates, they say so, only 1/3 of the jobs needed, because old India consists of 85% of the economy. So then they come around and argue, so new India economy would actually energize old India. How? Digital infrastructure can help clusters of small manufacturing firms enjoy advantages of large manufacturers through cheaper credit, larger end markets, new credit platforms, tech solutions for agriculture. Fine, but do any of these guys who make these claims also tell you, or even know, because they cannot tell you if they don't know, but you know, that 70% of the 64, 66 million MSMEs are unregistered? The government itself doesn't know that they exist, Baba. तो help किसकी करोगे वो? सरकार को खुद नहीं मालूम कि कहां है, कौन है, क्या करते हैं. You get the point I'm making? Moving on quickly. All of this amounts to a structural crisis, is what essentially I'm arguing. Let me give you some numbers about this. Why do I call it a structural crisis? Because what you are seeing is a reversal of structural change in the economy. There was a process of structural change that I began by talking about when I mentioned the demographic dividend, right? We all know the term you know the term structural change, movement of workers out of agriculture, GVA out of agriculture into industry and services, agriculture drops. You expect manufacturing to be growing. All the talk is about Make in India, performance linked incentive scheme, correct? I'm not going to talk about PLI. If you're interested, I will talk about it in the question and answer, but let me just tell you what has happened to manufacturing. The talk is Make in India. For 25 years, manufacturing contribution to GDP or GVA was in the region of 17%. Till 2013-14, till 15 also. And then come the 3 policy-induced shocks to the economy. Then you get from 17, you get to 16, 15, 14, it actually goes to 13, and then it's recently been just rising. 17 to 13 is only just recently risen above 15%. That means manufacturing contribution to GVA is dropping, not rising, despite the talk about being Make in India. As though that is not enough. Though that is not enough, manufacturing contribution to employment fell as a share from 12.8% in 2012 to 11.5% in 17-18, and since then it has remained roughly stagnant. Absolute level manufacturing jobs in the country, organized and unorganized, was 60 million in 2012. It was down in 2017-18 to 55 million. 5 million down, it has only recently climbed back up. That means for about 10 years, manufacturing has seen a lost decade. In this same period, the share of manufacturing in both employment in China has been increasing, and they have swamped our markets. Pull up your trousers, look at the socks you're wearing, probably Chinese socks. Forget about the phone, even their socks. There was a time when we at least had socks, we made socks. That's the scale of deindustrialization that we've seen. Okay. If that was not enough, I've already mentioned this, that you see from this is very important for you to appreciate. Don't look at the graph, just listen to me. The process of structural change was very slow for about half a century in our country until the beginning of this century. As a result, the number of workers in agriculture was dropping, but only the share of workers in agriculture was dropping, which used to be in the 70s, in the 1950s and 60s. It had dropped to about 42% in the years 17, 18 or 18, 19. It's only since 2004-5, mark the year, that the absolute number of workers in agriculture began to fall. Until then, only the share of workers in agriculture was falling. Why did the absolute number of workers in agriculture fall? Because non-farm jobs were growing at the rate of 7.5 million per annum for the first time in the history of India. We were growing at a rate of 7.8% per annum for the first time in the history of India. Please try and understand and appreciate the importance of the data that I'm citing for you. Now listen to what has happened. From 42% of GDP, where in China, the share of agriculture in total employment is under 30%. Okay? Manufacturing is in the region of 29% of GDP. Of total employment, where is it in our country? 11.5%. Agriculture, which was seeing an absolute decline in the number of workers from 04 to 18-19, sees a reverse migration of 80 million in the last 4 years. I told you this. 80 million It goes from 200 million, that's what you're looking at here, 200 million, 18, 19. I only have in this graph until 22 to 247. In 23, 24, PLFS tells us it's 280. That's a 40% increase in the number of workers in agriculture in a matter of 4 years. If this is not structural reversal or the change or the reversal of structural change, what is? Especially when it's happening and accompanied with manufacturing jobs falling. Isn't it? Okay, moving on rapidly. I'm going to move much faster now. This is absolutely critical for you. I began by telling you that the demographic dividend began in the 1980s. Why is China such a success story? China is a success story because it rode the wave of its demographic dividend. It grew at a historically unprecedented 9 to 10% per annum for a 30-year period. No country in human history has done that. No, sir, not for 30 years. Korea grew at 8%. 15 years, it plateaued, began to slow down. Didn't matter so much because they're a country of 44 million people. China is a country of 1.4 billion people like us. That's what realizing the demographic dividend means, because they brought not only the growth rate up, they reduced the number of poor by an unprecedented number. Even the World Bank has to agree that their absolute number of poor has come down to well below 10% by the $2.15 poverty line. Okay? Because they rode the wave of the demographic dividend. Their savings rate were what they were. Their investment rates were what they were. They captured global markets. They are a world power. They are a superpower. Trump goes in fear of them. Okay? I don't have to tell you what India does in the same circumstances. This is a very important graphic. China's dividend is over, like that of Brazil, like that of South Africa. We are the only BRICS country which is still got 15 years of our dividend left. Why do I say 15 years? Look at the middle graph. This is the total number of workers graphed over 2011 to 2071. This red line is the 15 to 29-year-old number. That number is already dropping from about 2021 onwards. But that's less important. This is the important one, 15 to 59, because this is our dividend. Numbers rising, 26, this is 31, this is 36, this is 41. Climbs to 998, meaning a billion. Potential working population, working age population. 46 already down then. What does that mean? This is tipping down, which means that the share of the working age population is not rising. That's how I defined it. Remember? And the share of the dependent population begins to increase, because now you don't have, as before 1980, are high young under 15-year-olds, lots of children, because our TFR has dropped. Our TFR has dropped to what? Who can tell me what our TFR is? That total fertility rate. How many children are born to an average mother in India? Huh? Is it 2.1 or is it what? It's less than 2.1. It's 2 in 21, National Family Health Survey. Okay, 3 states and 3 states only, all in the north, including my own, where I was born and grew up and went to school. UP, Bihar, Jharkhand. Only 3 major states which have a TFR of 3 in Bihar, 2.5 in UP, and 2.4 in Jharkhand. The rest are all 2.1 or less. So, why are you surprised that this is happening? Anyway, bottom line, 15 years, that's it. And it's very important for you, all of you, to know that you know this now, but our policymakers don't know this. They genuinely don't know this. You want proof of this? I'll tell you later if you ask me a question about it. I have proof that I know, that they have proven to me that they don't know. Moving on. Under the circumstances, there are at least 4 demographic groups now who have to be provided jobs. Each of these groups is a looming crisis. It's a current crisis and a worsening looming crisis. Moving on. What's the one? One is there's a flow element here. 15 to 29-year-olds, all of you. There are about 6 to 7 million entering the labor force each year. And please note, enrollment rising at every level across the education sector. We graduate 1.5 million engineers each year, 8.5 million graduates each year, BComs, BScs, BBAs, etc. So, we are talking about 10 million a year, okay, including a lot of girls who may or may not find work despite their education level and therefore drop out, a subject I will come back to. Girls LFPR, labor force participation rate, which is the share of those in the working age, girls in the working age who are actually looking for work, not necessarily finding work, that's WPR, worker participation rate. And the difference between the LFPR and the WPR is the unemployment rate, a subject I will come back to in a minute. So, the LFPR has been dropping in India while education enrollment rising. Now, I will tell you of a Nandi Foundation survey done in 2018 of 70,000 teenage girls, 13 to 19-year-olds. Question was asked, very telling question. Question was asked, what age do you want to get married? 25% said between the ages, you know what the legal marriage age is? Who will tell me what the legal marriage age is? For girls, yes. 25% said between 18 and 20. 51% said between 20 and 25. They are all getting educated. They don't want to get married. Why don't they want to get married? Because they want to get a job, like their brothers. What makes you men think that you are the only ones who are going to get the job? Why shouldn't they get the jobs? What makes you think that? They are entitled to it, and their parents need to learn that they are entitled to jobs in much the same way as the girls are, as the boys are. But we have the lowest female labor force participation rates in the world. We are worse than Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Welcome to reality. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. There's a stock of the small and landless farmers who don't want to remain there. The 200 million I've already mentioned is now 280 million actually. So, we've got to bring that down, just no question about it. Non-farm jobs have to be created. There's a stock of unemployed which used to be 10 million in 2012. It's in the region, it was 30 million in 2019. It's somewhere in the region of 28 million currently. We have to provide jobs for them. That's the third group. And then there is a fourth group. This is the stock among the youth, 15 to 29-year-olds, who are NEETs. Who can tell me what NEET is? Not in what? You're absolutely right, beta. Training, education, employment or training. तो क्या कर रहे हो भाई? Not in education, not in employment, not in training, 15 to 29-year-olds. What has happened is, you looked for work, didn't find it because you're willing to work. The data is telling us, right? You're willing to work, but you stop looking for work. So, you become a discouraged worker. There's a category that we labor economists use, discouraged worker. इतने हताश हो गए कि घर जाके बैठ गए या लुम्पेन बन गए, सड़क छाप, you know, radical fundamentalist organizations join कर लिया. I don't have to tell you वो क्या organizations हैं, सब तुम्हें मालूम है. That number, believe it or not, was 51 million in 2012. It now stands at 100 million. This is a 15 to 29-year-olds. Are you with me? It's a doubling in a matter of a few years. So when I said to you at the beginning, oh my God, the labor market has tightened, life is really going to be hard for you. You better wake up and smell the coffee now, so that you're doing damn well. No fatrubazi. You have to really work hard so that you're the best of the best. Moving on. Now there is a view that we are presented with that, you know, we need no more than 7 million new jobs at a LFPR of 60% to preserve the status quo on unemployment, and an increase above 7 million will just reduce the unemployment rate. This statement is a straight quote out of none other, someone who was a former Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council member and India's executive director at the IMF. You understand? That's the government economist thinking. Our estimate is that, and the logic is, oh, the TFR has dropped. TFR drops, but you know, these young people, once they are born, they are going to enter the labor continue to enter the labor force for the next 20-25 years. We estimate that we need 10 to 11 million new non-farm jobs each year. Now, look at what has happened to the type of youth employment. It has very direct relevance for you. And this is again a claim made by the government that, oh, the PLFS for the last 4 or 5 years is telling us, I hope everyone knows what PLFS is, Periodic Labour Force Survey, is telling us that the LFPR is rising, WPR is rising, and the unemployment rate is come down to 3.2% from its peak, 45-year peak in 2017-18 of 6.1%. That's the narrative. Correct? You will hear it from the former Chief Economic Advisor, Subramaniam, coming from your own city, not far away, Indian School of Business. वहाँ पर पढ़ाता था, रघुराम राजन का स्टूडेंट है, समझ रहे हो आप? These are all people who you know. टीवी पे रोज देखते हो इनको, अगर टीवी देखने की गलती करते हो तो these are youth, please remember, all educated. What has happened? What is the data? This is, look at the data. This yellow line is 18-19, the year before COVID. Notice this, what is this category? UFL, unpaid family worker. Let me explain what this term unpaid family worker is. Only the PhDs who work in labor might actually understand this. There are 3 types of work in the country. You are a casual wage worker, yani ki dihadi mazdoor. There is the regular wage worker. All of you expect to become regular salaried workers. You know, the people in the front row are all regular salaried workers. There is these are the waged workers. Then there is a category of self-employed. The first 2 categories are about 20-22% of the entire workforce. 58% is self-employed. There are 3 subcategories there. I need you to understand what these 3 subcategories are. 1 or 2% of this 58% self-employed are employers. That's the first subcategory. The other 2 categories predominate. What are they? Own account worker. And the third category is unpaid family labor, unpaid family worker. Oh, who's an own account worker? Step out of your campus, the mochi, the nai, the press wala, the thela wala, who you buy your sabzi phal from, own account worker. The other, unpaid family labor, the women, the sons and daughters who work in the shop where you go and buy your bread and milk from, or the woman or the child who works on the family farm, unpaid family worker. Massive increase in this period from 25 million to 25 million to 41 million among youth 15 to 29 year olds. यानी कि पढ़ लिख लिए और घर में unpaid family worker हो. You are employed according to the PLFS. जय हो तुम्हारी, तुम क्योंकि unpaid family worker तुम यार employed category में आ गए. 45 million increase in a matter of 4 or 5 years among women. So government is gloating over the following fact. LFPR of women is rising. अरे जय हो तुम्हारी, अकल की बलिहारी जाऊं मैं तो कहता हूं. Meaning unpaid family workers in a matter of 4 or 5 years, women who were leaving agriculture until 2017-18. Am I right, Professor Jajati Parida? He works with me on all these numbers. Women who were leaving agriculture, which is what we want to see happen, na baba. The mothers, they were poorly educated, they have no choice to be in agriculture, but even they had left agriculture. The girls who are gotten educated, they don't want to be in agriculture, but they are in agriculture now. अब समझ रहे हो, फीमेल LFPR बढ़ गई, कितनी अच्छी बात है. सरकार ढूंढो रहा पीट पीट के सबको दुनिया को बता रही है. हमारे अच्छे अच्छे देश के अर्थशास्त्री विश्वनाथ गोल्डार एंड सुरजीत भल्ला एंड के सुब्रमण्यम, तुम्हारे ISB वाले बता रहे हैं देश को और दुनिया को भी कि देखो फीमेल LFPR हमारी कितनी बढ़ गई. कहां जा रहे हो भाई? Moving on very rapidly, this is showing youth unemployed, had tripled between 2012 to 18. Anyway, it is coming down, but it's coming down. Why? I've already shown you, because they're showing up as either own account workers or unpaid family labor. I'm going to move very rapidly. I've already talked about the NEET population. This is the 17-18 number. Sorry, I forgot. It was 50 million in 11-12. 17-18 was also 51 million. It went shot up as quickly as that, and this is where it is today. These all have to be given jobs. Otherwise, they will be creating social conflict, because these are the lumpen young. They're not the lumpen proletariat, DNR. They're not the lumpen proletariat, be under no illusion. These are the lumpen period. They're not even the lumpen, petty bourgeoisie. Be under no illusion. They're just lumpen period. Absolute great fodder for you know who. Now I'm turning, I know I've sort of taken a lot of time, I don't know where I am in terms of my, I'm going to leave you with hope. I'm going to leave you with hope, because I have a whole strategy for creating jobs. But I'm going to run through this really fast, and if you're interested, I'll answer questions about them. Firstly, we have to ensure that productivity in agriculture improves. There's far too much evidence about how important this is as a strategy for reducing poverty. An agricultural revolution preceded an industrial revolution in the now rich countries. Please remember this. Study this fact. I'm making an assertion, a statement, but go back to study it, don't have the time to talk about it. An agricultural revolution preceded an industrial revolution in the now East Asian success stories. You know what the East Asian agri growth rate was, as estimated by Professor Ashwani Seth, formerly of Erasmus University in Holland? 6% per annum between 50 and 80, 1950 and 80. What was our growth rate? Our growth rate in agriculture has never been more than 3.2% per annum in any decade in the last 75 years. 6% versus 3%. That's not an agricultural revenue. That means that productivity is not increasing, while at the same time the absolute number of workers in agriculture was going up and up and up all the way till 2004. So the way to generate demand in the economy, from rural demand in particular, is raising productivity. That means investing in investment, public investment in agriculture, not necessarily the, as opposed to the private investment in agriculture that we've been seeing in the last 20, 30 years, because that's what was actually happening even over the period between 2004 to 14. And that's how we were growing at 7.8% per annum, nearly 8. And that's how, you see, because the incomes are growing, the demand is being generated from the rural area for all kinds of products and services, especially the non-farm products and services, okay? Because the vast majority of the workforce is in agriculture. China, the evidence suggests, agriculture was 4 times more effective in poverty reduction than industry of services. But, China ensured labor absorption by the non-farm sectors. Consumption expenditure growth in rural India has been low. We all know this. Evidence is showing up every day in the pink press. Demand for scooters, two-wheelers is not picking up even now. Demand for, of course, the small entrant four-wheeler cars is not growing, but the demand for SUVs is growing. That means government investment in agriculture is essential, but the government has primarily allocated funds to agriculture through subsidies, you know that, and cash transfers for farmers at the expense of public investment to boost productivity. The rot began with PM Kisan, and since then there's now a competition between both major political parties for providing freebies to a whole variety of groups, including in the rural areas. If you continue to do that, you get debt to GDP ratio going where it is. If you continue to do that, you have no funds for health and education, because increases in health and education expenditure has not taken place in the last 10 years. I could demonstrate that to you, but don't have the time to do that. And you don't have the time to invest do public investment in agriculture. You don't have the time in a time of climate crisis and falling water tables to actually enable all our farmers to adopt sprinkler and drip irrigation. That means reduce. You live in the peninsular part of India, semi-arid territory. You get relatively lower rainfall than the north of India. And yet, name me how many people in this room, when you travel through rural India, have come across a sprinkler system of irrigation or a drip irrigation system. In Brazil, when I was flying over that country, going there for some conference 10 years ago, 15 saal purani baat, I was stunned as the plane came down, sprinklers everywhere. Israel, the country which we love now very much, has a success story because it's in a desert area. But are we learning sprinkler and drip irrigation from them? Unfortunately not. Okay, I don't have to state the obvious. Agri-growth creates demand for manufacturers, produces wage goods, generates non-farm rural jobs. Anyway, moving on, the more important point, and this is what I will now rapidly move through. I'm sorry that I've not spent, I won't have time to spend too much time on this. Industrial policy, not a subject that is very palatable to orthodox economists. However, UNCTAD tells us in 2018 that 100 countries of the world after the global economic crisis of 2008 adopted an industrial policy. India is the one country which doesn't have an industrial policy, has not had one since 1991. And don't tell me that Make in India is an industrial policy, and don't tell me that PLI or ELI is industrial policy, rapidly. And what have been the consequences of no industrial policy? Unlike East Asia, which has had systematically, including China, a manufacturing strategy and an industrial policy. Just as an aside, in China, the Planning Commission became more powerful after the economic reforms began, when it became a market economy, not less powerful. What have we done? What have we done with our Planning Commission? We are the only Asian country as of 10 years ago which doesn't have a planning ministry or a planning commission. Only Asian country. It should open up your eyes. What are the problems with not having? Well, we certainly did the right thing by reducing tariffs from 150% in 1990 to 40% in 98 to 10% in 2002. But there were three problems with the way we went about our economic reforms from 1991 onwards. One, the speed was too fast. Our tariff rates fell below WTO upper bounds, which affected our small and large manufacturers adversely, and we experienced deindustrialization. I won't have the time to elaborate on this, but there is evidence to suggest this. One, speed was a problem. Chinese didn't do it. They didn't bring their rates down when they joined the they brought their rates down, but not below WTO bound rates, upper bound rates. Okay? Next, the sequence was wrong. The reservations for small scale industries that had existed since Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 had the numbers of reserved products where only the small scale enterprises could produce the number grew to 836 products. That number grew from 0 to 836. That number began to be reduced after the economic reforms began, but the sequence was wrong. We opened up the globe to the rest of the world first from 91 onwards, reducing tariffs and many other things, but this was not eliminated. The reservation was not eliminated. In other words, our small scale industries were simply unprepared to meet the competition of the international imports. You get the point? It ends, but it ends, the reservation of products ends by 2005. In 2005, there were still 500 products. It ends after 2005. So, in other words, 15 years after the economic reform, we were still stuck with the license permit Raj thinking of 500 reserved products. Ridiculous. What has that resulted in? A highly informalized economy in the non-farm sector, and also a very serious problem of small scale. Bangladesh has manufacturers of 4,000, 5,000 enterprises. You can't find an enterprise here of 4,000, 5,000 workers easily in the textile sector. You can't, because it was a reserved product. So we permitted international competition, and these small scale units began to collapse. So the sequence was wrong. First, we should have allowed domestic competition for these small scale firms, and then we could have slowly brought the tariffs down. In other words, the sequence was reversed. Okay? And then the structure of tariffs post 2002 free trade agreements. We've signed 3 sets of free trade agreements, one with South Korea, one with Japan, and one with ASEAN between 2002 and 2004. What was the problem with that? This is the problem. How the tariff structure changed. Finished consumer goods tariffs were reduced, so imports flooded in, but tariffs on raw materials and intermediate inputs which would have been needed for domestic manufacture were higher. What resulted was an inverted duty structure, reducing the effective protection rate. You get the point? This is called an inverted duty structure. So it flooded, what we were flooded was with imports. I'm going to try and wind down quickly. I know I've taken much longer than I was hoping. So you can see we did the reform, but in many ways we did them wrong. Okay? Anyway, so we need to reverse this. If we are going to reverse the structural change that has happened, because the structural change process has been aborted. It's been stalled, it's been aborted, it's been reversed. We have to reverse the reversal. We have to reverse the reversal. for which we have no choice but to have a manufacturing policy aligned to export and import policy. We have to correct this in, inverted duty structure. And this has, adversely impact a whole series of products: paper, chemicals, pharma, computers, electronics, machinery and equipment, transport equipment, you name it. It's not that FICCI and CII are not making a noise about it, but no one's listening. Anyway, point is, we have sectors which have not impacted by IDS, like auto, like pharma, where we've done well. Anyway, so I'm going to move on very rapidly to just tell you what the other dimensions of industrial policy are, and only the headings, no details, Professor. Vertical dimensions of industrial policy: we need special packages for 5 labor-intensive industries to create jobs. What are the 5 labor-intensive sectors which create 50% of the manufacturing jobs? 50%. Furniture, wood furniture. Food processing, leather and footwear, garments and apparel, textiles. We need packages, special packages. That's the vertical dimension for them to create jobs. I'm going to move on. I won't even have time to sort of dwell on what the exact dimensions are. Third, because there are 7 or 8 dimensions of a coherent industrial policy that this country needs. There's a horizontal dimension of the industrial policy. We need to focus on 5,500 clusters of manufacturing that exist in our country. It would surprise you to know that we have about 1,450 modern industry sectors working in clusters. I could name lots of them in your own state. I'd leave you to discover what they are in your home state where you might possibly. There is a strategy called cluster development, which was adopted by Italy, which was adopted by China, and we have adopted it extremely weakly. India is a laggard in this regard, because it will, if we had a coherent industrial policy with cluster development as a focus, it would support MSMEs, because they are the ones who've suffered, they are the ones who create the most jobs in the non-farm sector. Anyway, because what we need is more such MSMEs which have production linkages with larger units, which is an established strategy of late industrializers. I'm going to move on rapidly in the interest of time. A fourth dimension of manufacturing policies is that most mid-sized towns, not Hyderabad, not Bengaluru, and of course not the other 4 metros, but mid-sized towns have very poor infrastructure. That's where most of these clusters are located. So we have to ensure that the investment goes to these cluster towns for infrastructure, improve their electric supply, regular electric supply, improve their sewerage, improve their water supply. If all this happens, the investment would get attracted to them, to the Lucknow, to the Patna, you understand, not to the Bengaluru, to the Hyderabad, etc., because this is not manageable. Moving on very rapidly, quickly in the interest of time. Human resources. I've already said to you, if I had had time, I would have spoken to you about the Leontief paradox, but I won't. You see, bottom line is, East Asia not only had industrial policy, they had an education and Tibet policy designed to underpin the industrial policy. That creates non-farm jobs. We don't have either industrial policy for 30 years, and we haven't seriously taken our education sector seriously at all, not in the public sector, and we've allowed the private sector to mushroom unregulated, and the private sector has actually, is laughing their way to the bank in both the education as well as the health sector. I gave you the health sector example. The education sector example is a very simple one. Drive out onto a road from here, going to Mumbai, going to Bangalore, and you'll see dozens of private college this, private college that, engineering college this, and management college that, churning out unemployables. You and I know, which is the reason why higher education has gotten massified. Massification has taken place. We are very proud of that massification. We can talk about that in questions, but churning out unemployables. Quickly moving on, very important, we need to divert students from general academic education, from higher education into TVET, technical and vocational education and training. Believe it or not, in our workforce, only 3.4% of our current workforce has received formal vocational education or training. An additional 7% have gotten technical education, meaning diploma, certificate or 3-year degree. That's it. The rest, you'd be stunned to hear that 62% of our total workforce has education only up till class 8. Brahmanical society we are. That's what we still are. A highly segmented education system, of which many of you and me we are beneficiaries, but it has created a segmented labor market. Informality predominates. 91% of our workforce is informal, and only 9-10%, which is what you are attempting to join, are in the formal sector. Rapidly moving on, we have to divert people who shouldn't be entering higher education but be being trained for jobs into that, into TVET rather than higher education. This is my last slide. 2 more components of India's manufacturing strategy. We built industrial corridors. You've heard the Delhi-Mumbai corridor. There are 8 industrial hubs there. Good idea, very good. In same way, Amritsar to Kolkata, another industrial corridor. Those have come up with a lot of industrial hubs coming up, creating jobs. There are 3 others which you may or may not have heard of. One coming from Mumbai to Bengaluru, one going from Bengaluru to Chennai, and then Chennai all the way to Kolkata. The so-called golden quadrilateral is being covered, but these 3 are moving not so rapidly. At least the Vizag-Chennai bit is moved rapidly. Professor Parida and I did a consultancy for the Asian Development Bank 5 years ago. That was really moving rapidly. Those of you planning to do a PhD, examine that as a possibility. These are the kinds of things that need to grow, because we are not a GVC integrated economy into the rest of the world. We have to have much greater integration on the GVC, global value chains, if you don't know what that means. And finally, final bullet, creating a design and innovation institutional system. Let me dwell a couple of minutes on this, because you are all hearing about Industrial Revolution 4. What are the Industrial Revolution 4 technologies? Robotics, automation, 3D printing, blockchain, AI, machine learning. AI is the big talk these days. Which are the 5 countries in the lead? 3 Asian, 1 European, 1 North American. United States, Germany, China, Japan, Korea. You think we are anywhere? Niyat is the answer. Okay? Therefore, because our manufacturing is so anemic, is so shrunken, we have no choice but to put in place 2 dimensions which are completely missing in respect of our industry, regardless of all the hype about startups and yada yada yada. Okay? Industrial design used to be a big success story of India until 1990. Okay? Industrial design. We had developed this. My PhD work had something to do with that. So you can imagine, if I finished a PhD in 1985, obviously there was a fair bit of that sort of stuff happening. Otherwise, why would I do how could I have done a PhD? What has happened? We are just an importer now. Our industry has become, our industrialists, so-called, are not manufacturers. They're not even generating designers. They're not doing R&D at all. All they do is import. They're traders. They import, they sell that, and they're laughing their way to the bank. That's all it's doing. That was what is implied in my first, the dramatic fall, the IDS phenomenon. Import, sell, laugh their way to the bank, holiday on the Riviera. So design labs that can contribute to create digital ecosystems, design labs work to design quality products, carry out digitization, connect electronic systems, innovate for automation. All are needed if India is to adapt and develop our own industry in the IR4 technologies. And finally, India needs to reorient its R&D. You know, we spend, believe it or not, 0.7% of GDP on R&D, public and private sector taken together, and that share has not changed for over 15, 20 years. Korea is at 4%, China is at 2.5%, the United States is at 4%. We are at 0.7%. Okay, of which 70% is by the government, 30% is by the private sector. In the world, the ratio is exactly the opposite. 70% by the private sector, because that's the most productive R&D. So we don't do design, we don't do R&D, all we do is what I've just been telling you. So our government, 70% is accounted for by government. It doesn't fund research enough in our universities. It funds the CSIR, the ICMR, the Atomic Energy Commission, BARC, all of that is well funded. Space mission. What about our universities? The rest of the world has a system of putting most of their public money into universities. So industry parks develop, research parks develop in the educational institutions. That's the way forward. Do you have one? You have 2,000 acres. Is that being used for that? Thank you very much for your attention. Forgive me, I took much too long.
I'll dissolve for a moment. Personally, I have a great pleasure because as he started telling you that when it comes to the question of the first question or the title of the lecture itself, we are going fast, but are we also creating jobs? The meaning of that question is to see how fast we are going and what is that we are doing on the job front. The story that he has told you is fascinating for several reasons, particularly as I was listening to him, and of course I was reading him also. The idea is that on these themes, particularly last 7 point of strategies, he has been writing extensively. In fact, there can't be a better person than him, because one of the things that was not mentioned, he also spent quite some time in IAMR, Institute of Applied Manpower Research, where he had opportunity to look deeply into that of the nature of the manpower and all those dimensions. Combined with that, you will have a picture of what happens to the growth and that of, let's say, creation of jobs as well, if that is the major theme. But I was also reflecting, listening to his lecture, that most of you must be in the age group of 20 to 25. The story he told you about Indian economy is the story of your lifetime. So many of you, if we start telling you, look, 2004-05 and 2017-18, it's all over. The shift from agriculture to that of, let's say, the structural shift that we were looking for, all that happened by 17-18, which means you hardly crossed your school and about to enter the university. Because some of these things have to be told, because it is 2000-2007, as he referred to, is in a way the golden age of, let's say, savings, investment, consumption. the kind of, let's say, savings that perhaps touched as much as 37%, and the the total investment increased to that of almost beyond 50%. These could tell you as what was happening to that of that growth of 8 plus. But you push it down to that of, let's say, 14, 2004 to 14, it ends up with about 7.8%. That was the end of high growth story as well. What we are seeing is continuous setbacks. He has spent time to tell you that if you look at 16 is a great turning point. You know, not only, let's say, see, it's not the COVID that came as a natural kind of a disaster. There was a policy disaster beginning with that of 16, both in terms of, let's say, this, you all answered saying demonetization, and you also perhaps added to that of, let's say, what happened to that of GST. It was a complete setback to that of the whole of the direction in which perhaps we were hoping for a positive structural shifts from agriculture to industry, similarly work from, let's say, increasingly to industry, the stagnating manufacturing sector or even declining it, and the kind of, let's say, makeup that is being done, because we don't have any estimates even to this day when he referred that of 85% of the units in manufacturing or in unorganized sector, you don't have any way of, let's say, getting at the bottom of, let's say, what happened to them after 17, 18. I think this story is your own story. I mean, its caution is that you as students of economics, here is what you have put, he has put before you in terms of basics like savings, investment, what is happening to the debt, and then, of course, what is happening to that of the employment sector itself. I mean, including the challenge that perhaps comes to that of what we refer to as demographic dividend. If you look at the content of that, how we have just say squandered the opportunities without providing the kind of capacities that should be in that particular age group, which is supposed to support the dependent age group, that we have not created that through neglect of our own education. What is perhaps, it would tell you more about the talking in terms of 1 lakh crores allotted to that private sector for research. You neglect universities, and how do private sector do research, either medical or for that matter industrial? If you don't put money here, if you don't have people to learn how to do research, how does private sector do research? It's amazing actually that you get the kind of myths that perhaps are going on. Therefore, it is up to you perhaps to critically look at the processes and engage yourself. In fact, what we are saying is, unless you are cautious, you are alert, as he is. I think for me, he is the one who has been talking about Indian economy systematically, trying to, let's say, tell us consciously that this is not the way we do it. All these 6, 7 points that you perhaps would read more as it perhaps goes on writing it. I'm one of the perhaps the beneficiaries of his writings. Perhaps you could also join.
This is already published.
Most of them are there, and then of course the book will also come very soon. So I'm a little bit excited, therefore I took 3-4 minutes more than my time allotted. But we thought that we'll have some questions from the youngsters, so I ran it over.
Thank you, Professor.
No, you see, in fact, there are physical and biological limitations. Some people have to go for lunch.
You should close by 10, 107. Yeah. 7, 8.
No, it depends upon, let's say, how many questions we get. Our answers
Up to you.
will be short. Okay.
And if you are interested in picking my brain more, I think Professor Parida might have some ideas about that post-lunch in case. But let's not waste any more time. The floor is yours.
Yeah, any questions?
He put up his hand, there's
Yeah,
a hand
there is a
there,
hand, yeah.
and I want to hear from the girls, please. Yeah. Bolo beta. No.
Okay, just interconnected. Just interconnected. One is like when you see all these people around the supreme leaders or the first part of your presentation, it's like they also come from elite academic backgrounds and they are working in MITs, Cambridge and other places. So, Professor, what do you think? It's a kind of academic war between two schools of thoughts in which we are suffering, some as the common people and the students. When we compare this thing, that is one part, sir. Just second point is regarding the PLFS. It's about the domestic worker. So domestic worker is a separate category within the PLFS, right? So when we calculate the
someone who does someone who does domestic chores, not a domestic.
domestic workers.
No. This term is confusing to those who don't understand the PLFS data. Someone who only does domestic chores or household chores is not a worker. That's the point. That's we have to recognize. The unpaid family labor is someone who is working in the shop in cities and on the family farm. So that's a different category, and that number figures in the employed category. A housewife cooking food, looking after the children, not a worker.
Yeah, that's right. The question is
Yeah, go ahead.
female LPR. So when we don't consider the domestic worker, the women who are working as a cook or in a family. So when we don't consider this thing as a skilled worker or worker, so somewhere we are not recognizing their parts in the economy. That is one point. And when we recognize it, what are the challenges towards it? That's a two point.
Let me deal with your latter one. We are attempting to estimate employment, not work. There's a distinction here. No one is saying that the woman who contributes to the care of the elderly, to the care of the child, to the schooling that little boy or little girl who's going to school is not doing something of great value to the society. It's called social reproduction. Okay? Now, there's a big debate led by the feminist economists, which we don't have time to go into, and some of this is causing confusion in the literature. Let's not get into that. We can have a bilateral on that, if you don't mind. No one is trying to underplay the extremely important role that women play in the household in respect of what would otherwise be called the care economy. But let me come to your first question. I've forgotten what your first question was.
It was about the basically the two
Okay.
in academic world.
Yeah. Look, the problem you have is there is a so-called orthodox school which is aligned to the government narrative. I think I exposed the nature of that narrative. It's not a schools of thought in the sense of serious academic debate, because it's so shoddy, their argument. It's so not founded in theory, not founded in fact, that it's not a school of thought. How can you have a school of thought which is neither founded in theory nor founded in fact? You are a sarkari economist. Essentially, that's what you're doing. And I can tell you, never in the history of our country have we seen sarkari economists of the kind we've seen in the last 10. Never. I guarantee you, because I've been watching this for our economy for about 50 years, and I'm sure DNR has watched it for even longer, and he would bear my statement out. We are seeing a Goebbelsian situation. Do you understand what I've said? Goebbelsian, 1930s, go back and read Hitler's Germany. Or if you don't want to read anything, just watch Hitler's Inner Circle on Netflix. Next question. Sir. Yeah. What's your, so, I mean, is your question about the last 10 years or the preceding 10 years?
Trying to understand this. We had 91 reforms and they, our service economic grew. So we had a 10-year break some boom. But was it like there was change in specific thought? Was the stance that they took or?
No, look. It's very clear. I think I demonstrated this for you. See, there was a certain trajectory the economy had come onto thanks to the savings rate and then the consequent investment rate from 2002 onwards all the way till 14, well actually 15, 16. You look at the GDP numbers, very, smoothly transitioned from 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16. You wouldn't see a break. There's no discontinuity there. The discontinuity comes on account of policy from the date I mentioned. I told you that. These are policy-induced shocks to the economy. Why am I not making that clear? I thought I made that plenty clear. I spent almost 10 to 15 minutes on that. No, listen to me, listen. The previous government didn't have an industrial policy. This government doesn't have an industrial policy. So there are failures in both, in that regard, both. However, there were a whole series of macroeconomic decisions that were made then, which I demonstrated to you, when an economy the size of ours, which is relatively reasonably well integrated into the global economy, faces an exogenous shock like the global economic crisis, what do we put in place? We put in place a stimulus, a monetary policy stimulus and a fiscal policy stimulus. That's what we put in place in 2008. Guess what happened? What happened was that in 2 quarters, the growth rate had bounced back to 6.5%, and then thereafter the average growth rate in that 5-year period was 7%. Because we had economists running the show. Okay? You now have people who will not stand up and tell the supreme leader that, look, the decisions you're taking are catastrophic. There was a governor of the Reserve Bank who said, over my dead body, and went back to from where he came from. Okay, you know who I'm talking about. That's what he said. He wanted to stay on. He went back. 2016, 17, July. A party which had for 10 years opposed the GST systematically suddenly wants to introduce the GST without preparation. Do you know what the brouhaha between Infosys and the government was? You know about that. Okay? If you know about that, then you should know that that implementation of the GST was an outright disaster. It was a very good tax. Make no mistake. We were all in favor of it. Most federal countries have it. We subsumed 17 taxes into a GST. How it was introduced was bad. What's the problem? You want to show a tryst with destiny picture. Those of you who know 1947, 15th of August, you know tryst with destiny speech. You understand what I'm talking about, tryst with destiny? I hope you do. If you don't, you should listen to Pandit Nehru. We grew up with that sort of thing. You guys don't. That's a problem. Okay? Yeah, next question. Yeah, next, girls. Yeah, no, beta, I need the girls to come up and speak. No girl is putting up her hand, so therefore you go ahead. You have priority over him, beta. Bolo, bacche. That rather early on, the gig economy is a good thing that's happening for those who have gotten a certain amount of education and therefore are getting into new kinds of jobs that are available, which were not available earlier because of the system aggregators, right? The internet-based system aggregators, which is a good thing. However, they are self-employed people. They are informal workers. So don't make a big deal about gig and platform workers. We have to capture them in a social security net, just as we have to capture 91% of the workforce in a social security net, which our country does not have. We have high levels of unemployment. Yesterday I delivered the Foundation Day lecture at SAS, Center for Economic and Social Studies. You can go on Google, on YouTube and watch that, and that's a different subject. Yes, sir.
I have a different perspective, sir. Just I
Louder so that other people at the back can hear you. Just if you. We need to finish. We have to finish. This is the last question. Last question, loud, please, so that everyone can hear.
I would like to know about the role of institutional quality in the effective mechanism of this industrial policy implication. This is the first question.
No, one question.
Sir, just
One
one
question.
question.
No, it's a profoundly important question. It will take me a couple of minutes, 3 minutes to answer that. Profoundly important question. Thank you. Those of you who have not watched Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson and James Robinson, the 2024 Nobel Prize winning economists, on YouTube, please listen to it. It has a lot to do with what I'm about to say. It's very important. You see, what is the argument that they make? The argument they make is, and they have profound knowledge of countries across the globe, rich, poor, historical, etc. And they build that into their conceptual framework. Their argument is, rich countries are rich because they build quality institutions. The logic doesn't work the other way. Meaning, you first have to build institutions, quality institutions, then you become rich. It's not that you get good quality institutions because you became rich. No, it's the other way around. Which means we have no choice but to do exactly the same. Now, I will stop there because I'm under pressure to stop, but I call upon you to read their work, listen to them, and then if you want, you can always follow my work on Facebook or Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'm on all of them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Follow his work. Vote of thanks. She wants the.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, before she should say vote of thanks, I would one announcement. At 3 p.m. you have discussion is scheduled for you people. Those who can want to have discussion with sir, you can come and have participate. 3 p.m.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we come to the end of this insightful and enriching seminar, it is my privilege and honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of School of Economics, University of Hyderabad. First and foremost, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Santosh Mehrotra, for delivering such a thought-provoking and engaging session. Your expertise, insights, and valuable perspectives have truly enhanced our understanding of why is India growing fast yet not creating jobs. And we are grateful for the time and effort you invested in sharing your knowledge with us. Your presentation has inspired many of us, and we leave here with new ideas and renewed sense of purpose. We also wish to express our heartfelt thanks to our distinguished chairperson, Dina Rashima Reddy, for leading to this seminar with great skill and wisdom. Your guidance, both throughout the event and during discussions, has provided us with the structure and direction needed for a successful and fruitful seminar. I would also like to thank coordinators of this seminar, Professor Srijit Mishra and Dr. G. Vijay, and to Dean of our school to ensure that everything runs smoothly and efficiently. We are immensely grateful for your support. To all the participants, thank you for your time, active engagement, and thoughtful questions. Once again, on behalf of School of Economics, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone involved. We hope to carry forward the knowledge and ideas shared today into our future endeavors. Thank you.